Hi there. I am the CRM Ninja, and on today's episode of Oops Factor, I have Paul Slade. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks, EY. Good to be here.
It's wonderful to have you along. Now, for people who are wondering why I sort of have a, army or medic stuff, I see the camera shook at the enormously of it, in my background, I understand that you're trained to be a combat medic. Can you tell me about it and how you got into it in the first place?
It's the number one question I get asked, other than how do I get my business acquired? And we can get into that at some point as well, and that's always an interesting convo. But the combat medic side of things is a personal program, so it's not anything related to a country's military structure at all. But a few years ago, a friend and I were just talking about becoming better citizens and saying, well, if something happens around us, are we actually equipped to help people? And the answer was no. And so we went on a very simple course. It was called Stop the Bleed, and it's a highly recommended course. I think they've trained about 2 million people globally right now. And they teach you some very simple processes that you would go through as a normal civilian in order to help somebody that had kind of a car accident or maybe a gunshot wound or something like that. And so we went on this course and we were hooked instantly. I mean, we went through this thing realizing we knew nothing. And we said, we've got to get back to the fundamentals here and learn how this gets put together. And over the next 2.5 years, I spent a ton of time going through more and more advanced courses, just one after the next, until eventually, recently, it just got some certification out of the Hungarian Center for Military Medicine called Tactical Trauma Life Support. And we're continuing to evolve that. And it's just a personal project, but it's proving to be a very fun one. However, I think at 43 years old, I probably should have started this a good 15 or 20 years ago. The rest of the guys are much younger and fitter than me, and it shows all too often.
I'm sure you can keep up. So this is sort of a hobby for you then, I guess. Yeah. I mean, it obviously has real world applications, but...
Very much a hobby. So as you say, real world applications, but it's just become more of a passion project of mine. And interestingly, it's helped. It's helped in various situations in day-to-day life that have now happened. I know someone did say to me, now that you've trained, do you not think these situations seem to be finding you, or are you going looking for them? And neither of those is true. They just happen to be part of the course of just natural day-to-day. And as a result of that, and my training and the equipment that I carry with me now every day, everywhere I go, it's actually put me in a fortuitous position to help some folks, and I'm privileged to be in that position.
So when you say equipment, are you traveling with like a little first aid thing, a full one end of the extreme, the other end is a full medic kit, or somewhere in between?
Yeah, really good question. So actually, there's a whole series of thoughts that you have in terms of preparation. Much like you have in any kind of dynamics project, you should have layers of preparation in order to execute against the overall requirements. So if you think about a stop the bleed bag, so the kind of stuff you would need on initial scene and actually attending to that casualty, the bag's about that big. It's not big at all. You can carry a lot of very, very important equipment in that. And that'll be things like tourniquets, bandages, space blankets, which are amazing. And then as you sort of go, depending on where your gear is staged, for example, in my car, I have a much bigger medic bag, and that has more advanced capability, almost to sort of ICU in the field level. And so, yeah, you keep the stuff in the places that you can actually manage it easily. And even in my briefcase every day, if I go out to meetings, I've actually got some medical gear in there, which no one really knows about except for now after watching your podcast.
People are going to be like, Paul, what's in your briefcase? Bit of my laptop. No, I want to see the good stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
So with the training that you have, I have some very good friends who are combat medics and medic commanders, so I know a little bit about it. I also have friends who are trained to be paramedics. So is it on a scale whereby, for instance, if you decided, say, to become a paramedic, you could easily transfer across, or it's like a totally different track?
It's kind of a different track, and you'd have to go back to some of the fundamentals and complete those certification exams. So you would think of me as somebody that happened upon a scene before the paramedics were able to dispatch and get there. And so I'd be able to just do the fundamentals until I could hand over to the paramedics. And recently had a situation where the paramedics could only get to this casualty, which happened just outside the vet where I was taking my dog. And they could only get there in 57 minutes, so just under an hour. And so from that moment that accident happened until the paramedics arrived, I was able to stabilize the individual and then hand him over with a full report. And so that's just the kind of care that typically wouldn't have happened. And then the medics then obviously take it to a whole new level, which is incredible.
Wow, that's very, very selfless of you, because obviously it takes out, your daily life. You're having to carry stuff around, your own cost and things. And something could happen and just takes you away from normal business as usual, or family life as usual, because you're handling situations.
Sure. Hey, one quick comment on that is that obviously I don't go and just dive into all these situations, and neither should anyone else who has any kind of basic training. You always consider yourself and your personal safety first, and then you think about your family and the people that are with you, and you sort of work in those kind of layers. So you don't just dive into these situations head on and without any sort of forethought. And so you're always cautious in approaching these scenes and asking yourself, first of all, can I do this in a safe way? And can I actually be effective? Why am I just going to cause more trouble than it's worth?
That's true. And I guess in certain countries in the world, you might be thinking of the legal situation as well, as to whether you could be caught up in something you wouldn't want to be caught up in.
Sure. And I think that's an interesting one, because you find yourself in these situations, not just from a medical point of view, in all sorts of spheres. And generally, I think my default is to say you should act in a favorable way to your neighbor and to your friends and to the people around you, and deal with the consequences later. However, you obviously should ideally know what those consequences could be, and then dial back on what kind of treatment you're allowed to give. So, for example, I can't administer any drugs or any of those kinds of things, and so I would never do that. I would work within the parameters of what I would be allowed to do. But that said, I mean, if it was my family member and I needed to secure some kind of an airway, which is not seen as a legal procedure here in South Africa, but I was going to watch them die or wait for the ambulance to arrive, I'm going to probably just dive in and get that done. But again, I'm trained for that at a basic level, and obviously it's not a procedure I would do on anyone else.
Got it. No, I totally understand. So going from combat medic training and the rest of that to the oops factor, what do you have to share with us?
Oh man, there's so many lessons. You were saying, what have you got to share? And I was thinking, I've been in this thing for 17 and a half years, and I can't even begin to actually stack up my successes in comparison to all these failures and these mistakes. And it's a tough one, because you obviously want everyone that's watching this podcast to go, hey, I can take some inspiration from this. I understand that Paul and people like him have made these mistakes, and I should actually just get out there and get stuck in and figure it out, and probably along the way make some mistakes in the path of trying to figure out some successes. But there's one that after watching some of the other videos, that I think I'd like to share a bit more about, and that's the importance of our relationship with Microsoft, and how easy it is to actually underestimate that.
That's an interesting one. Nobody has really spoken about it. I mean, this has been going on for a while now, several years, this show. Nobody has brought that up before. Right. I'm all ears at this one.
So this is interesting, because it's not purely at a project level. And I suppose over the years, if you know some of my background, I've run multiple CRM practices, built those from the ground up, and as I mentioned, had them acquired. And that's why I get asked the how do I get acquired question. But what's so important about that is, as you sort of progress in your career, you start to engage customers at all levels. And very often you'll find yourself stuck in some way. You'll have a project that's not going well. Maybe the product's not kind of suiting that particular requirement down to the nth degree. And you have a few choices that you're faced with. You have things like, you could say, well, Microsoft just haven't gotten that piece right, and we'll have to figure that out for you. We'll have to go and custom build something, or I'll have to go and find an ISV add-on. But the tone that you take with your customer is extremely important. And so the situation that I've found myself in is when building my most recent Dynamics business, which was called the CRM team, we actually had a major outage with a customer. And this customer was in the insurance industry, incredible business, really amazing product owner, amazing executives who really thought about using technology to serve their customers more effectively. And they chose to use Dynamics 365 and various modules of it in order to make that happen. And at a certain point in time, I can't remember exactly why we ended up in the situation, but it had something to do with automatic deployment of updates. And I think our team had assumed that we had checked certain checkboxes, but it was at a localized level instead of like a global tenant level. I can't remember exactly the terminology there, but we found ourselves in the situation where the updates didn't apply to the dev environments, but they did apply to the live environment. And so everything went completely pear-shaped. And it obviously happened on a Monday morning. So that's a complete disaster. And so we were very proactive in our management of this, and I'm very proud of that. We sort of picked this up, and our head of that team got hold of me immediately. And I was still at home. It was early in the morning. He said, man, we've got a huge challenge with this customer. We just looked at the environment, and these updates have deployed, and the entire environment's down. They're not going to be able to run their sales process for today or until we get this thing figured out. And so our team gets stuck in. I mean, we were in a bit of a panic station, but we were very quick on the draw to actually get hold of the customer and notify them. So we were quite proud of ourselves again with how proactive we were. So we get hold of them and we explain the issue. Go ahead.
I found that it's always good to be able to be as proactive as possible, because although you may be the bringer of bad news, but you're the one, doing that. You could wait until the customer finds out and have sort of a bit of grace period. But if you come to them, it helps with that sort of trusted advisor status for it, and they hopefully engage with you better.
It does, except in this case, we had a little bit of hubris kick in, a little bit of ego, because we were going, look at how good we are. We get into the stage where we're able to give you a bit of a heads up and tell you what's going on, and we're going to be the guys who are going to help make sure that this all comes right at some point for you. And we told the customer, and obviously they weren't that happy, but very appreciative that we were on top of it, exactly your experience. And so we also said, look, we're going to get stuck in and figure that out. But at the same time, I'm going to get hold of some of the executives, and I'm going to make sure we put their mind at rest. So I phoned them immediately, told them what was going on. They appreciated that. But the CIO said, look, I need to see you. You need to come and spend some time in my office as soon as possible. So I quickly showered, got ready, jumped in my car, drove 30 minutes to their offices, and I walk up there, and he's got this look on his face. He's not happy. And I'm waiting for it. I'm just waiting for the abuse, because we shouldn't have created the situation in the first place. And sit down in his office, and he takes a completely different tone than what I was expecting. He said, I'm so sick of Microsoft. They keep doing these kinds of things. And I mean, they try and run this cloud and this data center, and then this happens, and it's my third issue in a year with them. And he just sort of lambasting Microsoft, which, and I'm going to admit it, wasn't a complete relief for me, because I thought I was about to be lambasted. And I just
thought you were about to be
there,
kicked out the window or something, and suddenly he's talking about the software provider.
Exactly. And I was just so relieved that I wasn't going to get beaten up. And I mean, he was actually just going and just having a vent. And at the end of the meeting, I went, yeah, you're so right. You know what? I'm gonna make sure we're gonna get this thing dealt with, and then I'm gonna speak to the Microsoft team, and we're gonna make sure we address this stuff fundamentally for you in the future. And he was so happy. So I leave the meeting and pack up my gear, my medic bag into my briefcase, etc. And I head out to the car, and I've got that feeling of just absolute relief. I'm so glad I'm not in trouble. And as I get to the car, I go, what have I done? Because our entire business is fundamentally based on Microsoft as a platform. We have no alternative. So if the customer loses faith in the Microsoft platform, they ultimately have just lost faith in us. So if they're going to pull the plug on Microsoft, they're going to pull the plug on us. And so we're out, whether we like it or not. And so I sat in my car for about 5 minutes, just collecting myself. And I phoned one of the senior Microsoft executives who I had a great relationship with, one of the EMEA execs, and I just told him what I'd done. And then I got lambasted. He's like, how can you do that? How can you not back us? I mean, what kind of an issue have you created? This is a massive customer for us. And we could lose a ton of revenue as a result. And I apologize. I took complete accountability for this. And I said, look, I'm going to go back upstairs and tell the CIO what's just happened. And he said, fine, but phone me afterwards. Still not happy. And so I get back in the lift, go back upstairs, ask the secretary if I can maybe just get another sort of 30 minutes with the CIO. And he sees me again, pretty surprised. But now I explain the whole thing. I'm like, man, you know what? It's not the Microsoft cloud. I've just thought about it. It's us. Our team could have done a better job. We've missed something here in this process. Microsoft's cloud's still up. Everything's still good to go. And in fact, I think you've made a great decision to stay on the Microsoft cloud. We're the ones who let you down. And then the CIO let me have it. So I was lambasted twice within about 20 minutes. And I mean, man, when I got back in the car, I was shattered. I was just tired. I actually wanted to come home and just get back into bed again. It's one of those days. But in the end, it turned out to be the best thing that I could have done and that the team could have done as a result. And that was that because of that issue, we actually had Microsoft execs fly in from the UK to meet the customer that same week. And we all figured out a plan together And in that meeting, by the way, I just said, look, it was completely my fault. I once again took complete accountability for the whole thing. And after that meeting, everybody had a new plan, new relationships were struck up, a dinner was set up as a result of it. And everyone was so happy with how we'd approached it. And the CIO pulled me aside afterwards and said, look, I've never had a partner do that. I've never had a partner take accountability and get this thing done. But I just realized how many times in my career I haven't done that. And I've let Microsoft take the blame. And it should never have been the case. So I think my point there is, hey man, like don't let yourself get into that situation. Don't let the platform and the technology and the Microsoft team take the blame for something that you can handle better or propose a new way of handling for your customer.
I mean, that's very true. Yeah, no, definitely. Now, obviously, there are times where, the standard product does fall short at times, or they release updates which do break things, out of the box things, and that happens fine. And in that case, try and get an update there. But obviously, we work in the Microsoft space. At least we're still working in the Microsoft space for the moment, and obviously we want to continue that. And if we've done something, we haven't checked something, then we take that. But I think one of the key things there as well is obviously the relationship that you've had. Now, how would you suggest people, whether they are, owning the business or they're not owning a business, they're more junior, how would you suggest that they could possibly engage to try and build up those relationships with Microsoft?
Yeah, relationships are actually very easy to build, but when I say easy, it's not something that happens overnight. I mean, you know how this works in your personal life. Relationships take time. You've got to start by figuring out if there's some common ground, and then ultimately continue to engage, and over time build trust by not over promising and under delivering. You want to make sure that you're constantly advising, discussing, debating, and being proactive in your engagements. Yep. And so if you apply that kind of thinking to both your customer and the Microsoft teams, and maybe I should add actually as a third element there, your colleagues, you find yourself in a situation where over a period of time, your relationships develop because you're sincere about how you're trying to build them. And so if you think about your question, they're saying, well, if you apply this from a Microsoft point of view, how do you build those relationships? You got to engage those folks on social media. You got to make sure you're going to the events and actually asking well-qualified and thought through questions. When you do get a chance to shake their hand and say, thanks so much for that presentation, I learned a lot. Again, be sincere in that and follow that up with a question. But really invest your time in those arenas. And over the years, you'll find that your relationships will build by nature of that process. And the outcome of those good relationships is that you can pick up the phone when you've made a mistake and you can tell them what that is, and they'll back you on that, even if they're not happy about it.
Amazing. Wow. Well, I have to say, I wasn't expecting anything like that at all when you agreed to come on. And I think that's such a powerful and amazing story. So thank you so much, Paul, for coming on the show to share it.
Great pleasure. Thanks, EY.
No problem. Viewers, we hope that you've enjoyed it and learned as much as I have from it, or perhaps even more. Feel free to check out the rest of the Oops Factor playlist, subscribe to the channel, take a look at the blog. And if you would like to come on the Oops Factor, feel free, put your details somewhere. There's a link that I think I'm pointing at below. Put your details in, I'll drop you a line. But above all, have an amazing day.